Bais, right? Baruch Shem, the first letter is a base. The Torah begins with the base of Bereshis. Why not Aleph? I mean, Aleph is the first letter of the Aleph base. Aleph corresponds to a Shem. It would make sense you should begin with an Aleph. The Medrash talks about this. Many Meforshim have asked this question. There are different answers given, such as just as the letter base is closed to what preceded it, but open to what comes after it, likewise, a person should not investigate what preceded creation, but only what came after it. That's the classical answer given, meaning that whatever happened up until creation, that's God's business. We don't have any no right to go looking at that. It's a waste of time. Most people consider it to be basically, but the reality is it's not accurate at all. That's really what Kabbalah does discuss specifically, and even the idea of being hidden is also misunderstood once you look at the Gra and other Meforshim explaining, but we know so much what's going on prior to creation. So, that's even though that pshat is a medrash and obviously stands, you have to understand on a deeper level what it actually means. Another answer is more technical. The Or Ein Sof, the infinite light of God, is exactly that, infinite, right? Everything begins and exists because of God's infinite light, called Or Ein Sof, the light without end. That means sublime, uniform light in every direction, infinitely, which means no boundaries or levels. On such a level, only the light can exist without any possibility of something else existing. In other words, as long as there was only Or Ein Sof, that's the way everything began, the Rizal speaks about, as long as that light was unfiltered and left in its original state, nothing else could exist but that light. Plain and simple, right? But that was not what God had in mind. God wanted man to exist and to even have free will, which required a world, right? And many creations and tremendous diversity so that both good and evil could exist. It's still all Or Ein Sof, but after it has been constricted and divided countless times, resulting in what Kabbalah calls Olam Perud, world of separation. In other words, the light began completely spiritual, beyond comprehension. We have no light that we can see or relate to understand what that means, and yet here we are in this very, very physical world. Somehow we went from ayin to yesh, from nothing to something, and that's all what Kabbalah discusses, the idea of spheres and partsufim, how the actual mechanism, the process that Hashem used to make this world, but that's where we are. We're now in a world of Perud, meaning everything, look around you, everything is distinguished, one thing from the other thing. That's the light being broken up and filtered down, right? So the letter base represents this transformation, which is why it is the first letter of Baruch. The concept of a brucha is to increase the flow of divine light into our world so that something good can become even better. This is why a flowing stream is called a brecha. That's what same word from the word brocha. This, I heard really the other way around as well. The brocha is a flow of light from Shemaim down to us. This is what Hanukkah taps into. The Mesiras Nefesh, the self-sacrifice of the Chashmonaim, who fought for God and Torah, elevated additional holy sparks. This triggered zivugim, pairing Mesiras, that resulted in a downward flow of light, empowering the Jewish army to defeat the overwhelming favored Greek army. How does it happen? And we talk about miracles, right? What is it? Miracles just like a poof? Hashem just wills? Yeah, well, that is essentially what a miracle is. But there is a mechanism, there is a system that Hashem uses and He employs that we can actually trigger. We can cause miracles to happen based upon the things that we choose to do and how we live our lives and the will that we put into things and the self-sacrifice. These are things that automatically, naturally speaking, trigger the light to come down. It wasn't just any light that the Chashmonaim drew down. The greater the sacrifice for Torah, the higher up the sparks reach in the spheres, and the higher the level of light that gets drawn down. Right? It's like the thing at the amusement park. You hit it, down here, and it sends up, this thing to hit the bell at the top. Right? Likewise, when we do mitzvahs and we're self-sacrificing for Torah and for God and the right thing, so we elevate sparks they come from the world below, they go up to Shemayim, that triggers a return of light. A person davens for some situation, they want to improve a situation, health or whatever the case might be. So what they're basically doing is that they're sending up sparks. The tefillah itself, and the stronger the tefillah, the more kavana you put into the tefillah, the higher it goes, and the more sparks you elevate, because that's really the fuel that you're drawing on. The same way if you drive a car, it requires gasoline. You drive the car today. You have battery powered cars, but the same idea. It has some source of fuel. You're using up the fuel to get the movement. Likewise, if a person does something in this world, by definition, they need energy. The energy comes from the tzaddik kedusha, holy sparks. So the more holy sparks you draw out into the world because of what you're doing, and you don't use as many sparks, or you might use a lot of sparks for evil things too, but they can't go to Shemayim in their existing state. If someone does an Avera, it also uses holy sparks. The trouble is that it dirties them, and they can't go to Shemayim that way. So either the person has to be punished in order to cleanse the sparks so they can go up to Shemayim, or the person does tshuva, which is the better way to do it, and that cleanses the sparks, and then they can go back up to Shemayim. But either the way, that the sparks have to go up to Shemayim, and once they do, so then that triggers a flow of light back down in the form of the brucha that you're asking for. So that's why it's so important to daven or to do a mitzvah and have as much kavanah as possible, because the kavanah acts in a sense like a booster rocket. Words have only so much power to penetrate the upper worlds and to bring the light back down. But the kavanah is like that booster rocket that sends it even further higher up towards Hashem, so therefore the success rate is going to be much greater. So in this case, it was the Or HaGenuz itself, the hidden light of creation that God created, the miraculous light that God hid on the first day, which resulted in a supernatural reality, and most important of all, greater revelation of God to mankind. Now, I'm not reading the footnotes here, because there are quite a few of them, but the book does have a lot, so some things that are not being explained right now are in fact explained in the footnotes, but it'd take too long to go through all of that. It is interesting that the mitzvah is not to light the menorah inside the house like we do Shabbos candles. Right? Shabbos candles we do inside the house because we want the light for the Shabbos Suda and for getting around. Right? The mitzvah of lighting near Shulchan everywhere in the world, just that in Chutz La'aretz it might be dangerous, so people light them inside. But in Eretz Yisrael, it is one of the most wonderful things to see, the glow of the light in the streets against the stone walls. Because of mitzvah persuminisa, of revealing the miracle to the world, to ourselves and the world around us. That's why we're lighting the menorah for everyone to see, right? But outside, in front of the house, just as the letter Aleph precedes the letter Bais, which is spelled the same as Bais, house. This indicates that the miracle of Hanukkah was not of this world, to which the Bais refers, but of the world of Aleph that preceded and gave rise to it, which is the world of the Or HaGenuz. In other words, the fact that we're lighting the house itself is a bias, is a base, right? So it corresponds to the base, right? We're lighting the menorah outside, in front of the house, the same with the Aleph, which corresponds to Kabbalah, is outside or before the base. So it's another way of indicating that this is to do with the Or HaGenuz, and the miracle of Hanukkah, and the story of Hanukkah is rooted in a much more miraculous spiritual reality, which is why it's 8 days long, because 8 is always the number that represents the spiritual world. So this is why we light 36 candles over the 8 days of Hanukkah, which the Or HaGenuz is said to be hidden. 36 is a number that indicates a revelation of Or HaGenuz, indicates a relation of Or HaGenuz has occurred, revealing the Shechina, the divine presence. Once the Or HaGenuz was hidden after illumining the world for 36 hours in the Garden of Eden, the 12 hours of Erev Shabbos, the 24 hours of Shabbos itself. Kislev is comprised of two parts, a chof and a samach, the word for cover, and lamed vav, which is a gematria 36. Chanukah celebrates the revelation of the supernal light of creation that, until the 25th of Kislev, remains hidden in the world, in creation itself. If the first 24 days of Kislev are used well, then a person becomes a fitting kli, vessel for the light of the Messianic era, that breaks into our world for 8 days, as it says, he made a separation in the illumination of the light. This is the Leshem speaking. He's explaining Rashi. Rashi only brings the Gemara, and the Gemara indicates or seems to indicate that the light was hidden at the beginning of history and will not be revealed again until well after in the Messianic era onward and in the world to come, not in this world at all whatsoever. So therefore, what's the point? And how can we say we're accessing it? So Kabbalah explains that the main light will not be revealed again until 6,000 onward. But a tamsis, a fraction, a portion of the light does remain available to man. And as small as that may sound, it is absolutely overwhelming for us. We could never handle the full light at this time, which is one of the reasons why God doesn't give it to us. We couldn't live. Moshe says to God, show me your face, right? Show me your glory. And God says, no man can see my face and live. That's what God's saying. You're asking for a revelation of a light that your body cannot hold, cannot handle. So therefore, I'll give you a sample. So therefore, God passed by. Moshe was in the cleft of the rock. This is all symbolic of the fact that the light is filtered down and we're getting a smaller amount of it. But that smaller amount for us is overwhelming. And this is what Hanukkah accesses through the mitzvah of light the menorah. So the Leshem goes on to explain, right, that the actual hiding was that, well, he says, that it should not flow or give off light except for the righteous, whose actions draw it down and give off light. The actions of the evil, however, block it, which leaves them in spiritual darkness. This itself was the hiding of the light. In other words, what it's saying basically is that the light itself knows, or it's built into creation, or Hashem controls it, of course, right? That it only flows to somebody who's a fitting container. The Gemara says that God looked down into history when he made this primordial light back at the beginning, in the first day of creation, and he said that the evil will abuse it. They'll use it the wrong way. So I'm not going to allow it to be abused. Sun, the moon, the stars, incandescent lighting, fluorescent lighting, LED lighting, all of that basically can be used by anybody. Nobody asks the question, are you good or are you bad? It's available to everybody. But the Oregonu is not, because that's a very special, primordial, holy light. So God made it, even after he hid it, that this light will flow down to people who are a fitting container for the light. In other words, it's like a glass of water, right? Water is the yikr. There's no question about that. But without the glass, you can't drink. You can, but it's not the same thing. So even though the glass is just a kli, it's what holds the water and allows you to drink. The same thing with your body and your soul. There's no question that your soul is holier and more important than your body. It's the essence of who you are. But without your body, the soul has no way to reveal itself, no way to accomplish anything. But the soul can't go just into any body. In fact, that's one of the main reasons why Mashiach hasn't come yet. Because the container necessary to hold the light of Mashiach, which is, the person himself can be in the world. Somebody today in the world, more than likely, is going to be Mashiach, sitting in the base. Imagine somewhere, he might be in his 70s, might be in his 80s. Who knows? We don't know the details of such a person. But they're so holy and they're so spiritual that if Hashem were to put the light of Mashiach into them, instantly, like Moshe Rabbeinu, right? You get siyata d'shmaya, they would become Mashiach. In the meantime, Hashem hasn't put that light into them, which is why he hasn't come. But in order for him to receive that light, he has to first perfect himself spiritually, become a fitting kli and container. All of us go through whatever suffering we go through in life as part of that process. That's what we're doing every day. That's what Torah and mitzvahs are all about, preparing the kli. So that's what the base starts off teaching us to do.